Hi everyone, welcome. What I'm planning to check in on today are these two systems that you see in front of us. These are African nightcrawler bins that have been now foraging, or more specifically what I refer to as fed foraging, for almost 2 months now. And to me that really just means adding no bedding. So over the past couple months we've been coming in regularly to feed, no new bedding. And another thing that we recently did was we put that piece of paper that can be seen beneath the plastic covers to aid in the preservation of the system's moisture by not allowing airflow to come and go around the plastic. Seems like it's been working quite nicely, and I've got a little bit more food for them to keep the process of fed foraging going in here. At some point we're going to say that the material has reached a fineness level, that we're going to start into the migration of the worms out of their material, much as you could see in the somewhat older system right next door, where we try to get them out of their finished castings. But I'll usually want to wait to a point where I could see that most, if not all, of the bedding materials that have ever been added have all broken down. However, I think the main sticking point here has been leaf stems. I've been continuing to see leaf stems in these systems, so I got some additional info about these systems to share with you on my green board, so once we get over to the bench I'll show you that. So let's set up for this feeding and get started. For the meal plan, I was pretty selective on picking foods that I'm fairly certain are going to go quite quickly. So I've got a couple pairs over here that are even struggling to hold together despite the fact that they were in my freezer now for a few weeks. They're like mush. And even the bag that they were in was full of juices and stuff starting to come out of them. So these things are probably just going to break down as soon as they start thawing out, and they're already doing so. I've got strawberries here and broccoli. All of these things, as I recall, are pretty quick going foods. And before we get started, let me just share with you the stats on this pair of bins. They're 58 days fed foraging now. So as I said earlier, almost 2 months. Their age, 268 days. That's quite up there. 22 feedings so far, last of which was 11 days ago. Similar to how we did it last time, my plan was just to kind of leave their newly added foods out on the surface. A little departure from how I usually apply foods, which is to dig a trench and submerge the stuff. And I am curious to see how we're doing as far as leftovers, because the selection of foods that I came down here with last time was just whatever was in the assortment of stuff in the bag that I chose to be their feeding. So I mean, certain things I'm fairly sure probably went pretty quickly, but I mean, I know there was chunks of orange, which sometimes go a little bit slowly. I mean, there was tomato and cucumber, which all also go pretty slowly, but like here I believe we're seeing some of the skin of the cucumber. I'm not concerned, those things will go too. And out here on the surface we can even see some of the novelty items that we gathered along the way as we inspected the system last time. Those are little spheres of corn cob. When I at one point tried to grind up a bunch of corn cob, I was left with these little round chunks which refused to break down. And here's one. I was just sort of looking for at least one other corn cob sphere. And here too, these things have been in here for some time now. Pretty tough stuff. I could certainly imagine these things going with the worms to their new home when the time comes to relocate them. But I'm not going to extract anything at this point. I think we're just going to collect up any leftovers we find and just include it on the surface along with the freshly added foods. And hopefully by being there where the action is, it'll continue to get the attention it needs to get further broken down. And I could see little signs here and there of leaf stems. It's certainly not a chronic situation. Those leaf stems will continue to break down over time. So sometimes I do wonder if perhaps it's just something I should ignore and not use as a reason to not proceed. So let's see, we did bring over the corncob sphere to be with our collection of food. Over here too, we've consolidated everything into a little bit of a pile. And I think that that's pretty much the way we fed. So anything below the surface should really not be any different from the rest of the system, other than perhaps some of the moisture that might have come out of the foods that we fed, possibly seeping down to the material directly below it. So maybe we've got some slightly more damp material in the middle. But I would assume at this point that the majority of the material in these systems is pretty, what's the word, homogenized, kind of all blended together, and for the most part all equal. So no little hot spots of leftover foods, or not even any sections that are holding out due to not being damp enough to promote worm traffic. That was the whole idea, like I mentioned earlier, for the addition of the newspaper top covers. But those newspaper top covers are definitely starting to show signs of wear. And I'm even wondering if perhaps at this point we could start to promote a little bit of drying around the edges in these systems. It's one thing I definitely noticed when I lifted these bins to bring them over to the bench, that they were quite heavy. See, now we're starting to unearth some of the stuff that I was referring to, some of these somewhat larger leaf stems that are still holding out quite a bit. They're super fragile, they for the most part break. But I think that these are one of the main reasons I've been thinking it might be nice to just continue a little while longer, in the hopes that some of that stuff continues to break down even further, resulting in less of that type of debris remaining in the systems. So I didn't really till up everything. I only focused my tilling action to the center, where I believe there might be a little bit extra moisture due to the feedings having been there and the damp foods that we added. Well, not so much damp. The foods weren't damp when they were put in, but the moisture content of the foods would have been expelled as the foods thawed and as the breakdown process occurred. So, I don't know. Is it necessary to till up and disturb everything in the systems? I can't recall. I just sort of buzzed through the video from last time, so I'm not sure if I already did give both systems a good thorough aeration everywhere. Well, you know, it wouldn't take long, and at this point we have managed to disturb most of the material. So to go a little bit further at this point, just to till up the material, shouldn't be a problem. It is kind of nice to see worms pretty much everywhere. When I focus their feedings in the center, I feel like I'm possibly, you know, distracting the worms from working materials out near the outer edges, and makes me wonder if perhaps applying their foods in a more distributed way, more all over the place, would be a way to discourage mobbing around one particular spot. So maybe we can actually spread the foods around a little bit more rather than leaving them in a pile in the middle. Although last time I did kind of spread it out a bit. So here in bin number 1, I think we've done a pretty nice job aerating the stuff in here. And the clumpiness, I think the clumpiness is the telltale sign for me that perhaps, alright, this is pretty loose. Did we already till around over here? We may have. Man, lots of worms down here. Oh man, look at that leaf stem. That's a big one. But here I don't feel it as much, but over in bin number 1 I definitely felt a good bit of clumping, like the material doesn't want to just kind of crumble and flow. Here it doesn't want to very much either. I'm wondering if perhaps not blocking the gaps around the plastic might be a good way to go in here to further promote, well, not further promote, but now to promote a little bit of moisture loss through evaporation around the edges of the plastic. I mean, if here and there material on the edges does get a little bit dry and there should happen to be a leaf stem over there that doesn't get broken down due to the encroaching dryness, then so be it. That'll just be a little bit of the risk we'll have to assume in the interest of allowing these bins to kick off what to me appears like possibly a little bit excess moisture here too. Besides the clumping, the adhering of the material to my glove is often a sign too that perhaps moisture levels are a bit much. So I think that is a good way to go here at this point, to exclude the paper, or maybe even just put the paper back in and let them start treating that as extra food to nibble on should they care for something that's more I guess on the carbon heavy side versus the typical kitchen scraps. You know, you give them the kitchen scraps, that's got more of a nitrogen rich composition, whereas the bedding type materials, which typically consist of stuff like paper or leaves, are more considered to be the browns, if you will. There's the greens and the browns, the more nitrogen dense materials versus the more carbon rich stuff. Yeah, so little bits of the typical brown and green thinking of composting does apply to the worm bins, but not so much because you're trying to create a balance of materials that are going to create a good hot compost, but rather just to give the worms the balance of the types of foods that they rely on to have a good rounded diet. So I think that that's going to be their feeding there, and since we're not going to put the papers back on the way we had them, obscuring airflow around the edges, we're going to kind of just throw them closer to the center near where the foods are. In a way, I'm almost treating this stuff as part of their feeding too anymore. And it is quite a generous feeding if you think about it. So I'm not sure if we'll be back in another 11 days like we were today. Maybe we'll wait a little longer. I guess it sort of depends on how I'm doing as far as stuff in my freezer. Right now I'm a motivated worm dad, motivated to be generous with the feedings because my freezer is jam-packed with stuff. So the worms are going to benefit from my generosity until such a time I feel like I've made enough space in the freezer to not feel so crowded by their foods. So I got a couple things I got to take care of getting cleaned up, put away. I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.